Hi everyone, this is Jay Johnson from dailytexture.com, and this is just a short little video to show you a little editing technique that I use for basically what's called throwing light onto a subject. Um, a group member on my group Artistry Beyond the Camera on Facebook had asked about this. She was working on a bird picture and had put the textures with it and is trying everything she knows to toss, to put some light, directional light onto her subject. And I wanted to show you how I do it using my software. Now, Robbie, the lady that asked about this, she uses different software than I do. And I'm not sure in other softwares how you will accomplish this. But I'm going to show you and describe exactly in my software how I do this. And maybe you can figure it out in your software. There's got to be some similar tools. This is a pretty basic thing. And I'll just play with it on this image I just finished today of this blue heron with a fish. He's got some nice light back here, and I kind of matched that up with the texture. But the fish has some light right here. And I actually thought about this when I did this piece, and I thought about turning him around so the fish would be more under this, in this lighted area over here. But I really like the contrast that the fish had over here, so I left it where it was. But let's just say I don't like that and I want to change it. And I want to add some directional light coming this way. In Paint Shop Pro, which is the software I use, there is, in the selection tools, you can do a box selection, which is a certain shape, or you can do a freehand selection, which is what I use. These are my settings here. I never mess with this mode, so I really can't tell you what that does. I have anti-alias checked. I have no idea why. It just works. Smoothing is at 0. I have no idea about smoothing or range. Range is blanked out anyway. But feather is set at 200, which is as high as it will go. Now, what I do is I will draw a selection using this freehand selection tool here. I will draw the selection where I want it to go. So if I want light to come in from this way and hit this side, I would start over here on this side of the picture and just draw a selection like this. And because I have feather set as high as it will go, and this is the important part, it actually spread this selection out a little bit more than it normally would. Now, at this point, I would go to adjust brightness and contrast, and I would either use curves, which is a lot of people use curves, or just make a general brightness and contrast adjustment. I have the brightness and contrast set to a certain amount, but let's say I want to raise this up. Ooh, that's too bright. Let's see. Let me raise. I'm trying this. Okay, now see, that's too bright. Let's go back to what I had. You don't need much of an adjustment. It's best to do small amounts, and then you can always do. I'll go back to 11, which is where I had it. You can always do larger ones later. So that just threw a little bit of light right there. Let me adjust that up from that 11 and go a little bit higher with that. Let's go to 20 and see how that looks. That's a little better. And then when you right click off of this, you can see. In fact, here, let me do this. Let me just duplicate this layer, which is something I preach to everybody, and here I am not doing it. And I'm just loosely drawing a selection in this area where I think, watch the size of this. It's going to jump up. It's just lined up right there at the fish's nose when you let go of your selection. See how it's spread way out? That's because of the feather. But that makes it not as harsh. Now let's try. It looks nice. I think it's still a little bit too streaky, a little bit too bright. So we can do a couple different things. We can, I'm going to adjust it down. I had it at 11. I raised it to 20. Let's go to about 15. That's a little better. And I always roll out to see. Now, since I did this on a different layer, I'm going to shut this one off. That's before, and that's after. See how it just lit up the face of the bird and that fish a little bit? And if it looks a little too streaky, like that section is still too small, you can always go do another selection, and you could do a little bit smaller. You want to play with this and get your lighting to look right. Just do little smaller adjustments right along the edge where you did that previous one. So now I've set it on 10 and I've done 2 smaller adjustments, but it's not quite as streaky. And you could do this as many times as you want, or make your selection bigger to start with where it'll expand more. Okay, so let's blow up here so we can see the fish. This is before and this is after. So with this image, it doesn't really make sense to have the light coming from here since there's obviously light coming from here. I'm just doing this as an example to show you how to make the light go in a certain area. Use the freehand selection tool. I'm sure your software must have one, and a feather tool. And you might just have to play with whatever settings you have up here with it until you get it to do like you want it to do. But these are the settings I have set for mine. Now let me show you if you don't have feather set what happens. So we're going to shut this layer off. We're going to duplicate this layer again and bring it to the top so we can play with it. And we're going to turn that feather. This is why feather is important. Turn it all the way down to 0. Now let me get a little room here I can work on, and let me bring this area in. Now see, this time it didn't spread out. So watch what happens when I do the adjustment this time. Now, can you see this? You see how that looks real choppy, and you see that edge very sharply? That's with having no feather turned on. So that's that way, and this is the way with the feather turned on. Now let's roll out. Okay, so this is with the feather turned on all the way up as high as it'll go, because you want that selection to spread out and soften those edges. This is with the feather turned down to 0, and you get this sharp line here. You see how awful that looks right there? And see how nice that looks? So this is why you want to leave feather turned all the way up when you do this kind of thing. So to summarize, I've got my final image open. I want to throw a little light in a certain area. I've chosen the freehand selection tool, and I've chosen to make the feather go all the way as high as it will go. So when I make that selection, it's going to spread out and really soften those edges of the light. Because if you don't do that, you're going to end up with this. And this is what you don't want, because it doesn't look natural at all. This is what you do want right here. And I worked by using the brightness and contrast adjustment on my software. And I had very low amounts set here. The first time I did this, I had it set to 20. For the main adjustment, I didn't like that, so I brought it down to 15. And then I did a couple of side adjustments, and I think I had it set to 10 for those. But as you do the side adjustments here, it'll just expand it out even more. And of course, I'm on the wrong layer, so that doesn't help. Get on the right layer. Say I wanted just a little more right there on that bottom side. So I just put a little more there. So you can do that as many times as you want to get your lighting to look natural and like you want it. Of course, this doesn't look natural because my light is coming from here and not from here. But that's one way I have learned to do it if you want to throw light on a certain area of your subject. Even if you want to say brighten up just a small spot on your subject right here, say, and you want to brighten that up, you could do it like that. And it's because it's feathered out, it does a very subtle adjustment. And that's what you want to do, subtle, even if you have to do it more times. You just want to be subtle about it. You don't want to end up with this harsh looking thing like this, because that just doesn't look good at all. So subtlety is the key here. Now, some people also use curves. I've never been real adept at playing with curves, but I've just, a lot of people are very good at using curves. I seem to have a problem with the little nodes here, grabbing it and moving it around and knowing exactly what to do. I know I have used it some, and I know that you can create some neat effects using the curves and really adjust your lighting nicely with curves. That's a little too bright for me. He's blown out right there. You don't want to blow him out. You want to see that, or I do anyway, I want to see that detail. So I just use the brighten and contrast at those very low amounts. Anyway, I hope this will help you when you're going to throw light on your subject. Just look for a freehand selection tool and make sure you can feather it. There's all kinds of ways to accomplish it. You could potentially even do a totally new layer on top, and you could do a selection on the new layer. Let me shut this off completely. There. So I'm back to my original image, but I'm on the new layer. Let's say you did a selection and you fill it with white. And this is just an experiment. I have no idea if this is going to work. And then back your opacity out. Really, really low. Gives a nice misty effect. It doesn't really do the same as adjusting brightness and contrast, but you could probably play with layer mode and maybe come up with something that works a little better if you're doing it that way. That works. Soft light. So here I did a new layer. Same thing. Made a selection with feather on all the way up as high as it'll go. Filled the selection with white. Backed the opacity down to 12 and changed the layer mode to soft light. And that created some light on the fish where I wanted it. And that is very similar to, let's turn that off, this back on. That's very similar to that. Doesn't have, it's not quite as detailed, and I think that's because I used brightness and contrast. I was actually adjusting the contrast. But that's another way to do it if you want to put a layer on top and just do a splotch of white there. Like, I've got something turned on I shouldn't have. Just, fill it with white and then change the layer mode, back your opacity down to where you want it. But the key is, when you do the selection, is this feather right here. That's the key. You want to be able to make sure your selection can feather out and get really big, because that makes the soft edges as opposed to that old hard edge that we saw there. So that's how I do that. I hope you find this helpful. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.